Hello and welcome to this episode of One Year On. It's the last day of the month of April and I left Mr. C 1 year and 7 weeks ago, and those 7 weeks since I'd left had been filled with every emotion you can list. There had been a lot of tears, a lot of accusations, there were threats, there were insults, and there was so much shouting, and we hadn't been in the same house. There'd been begging and promises that things will be different. There were doctor's appointments and therapy sessions, and there'd been business matters to deal with. And Mr. C was still in full control of all of mine and my daughter's things, and he'd made it very clear that if I was going to get any of it back, it would be strictly on his terms. At this time, I was also developing a broader understanding of the dynamic of abuse, the power and control wheel, and the cycle that abuse follows. I also had strong suspicions that Mr. C was in fact very narcissistic in his personality and could potentially even be suffering from narcissistic personality disorder, or maybe even be a sociopath. I was taking the very first steps to reconnecting with my authentic self, and I was growing in confidence in my ability to get through this and be a better parent to my 5-year-old daughter and my second daughter, who I was expecting in 5 months' time. I was still very confused about the whole ordeal though. I couldn't understand how I could simultaneously be able to see all of Mr. C's cruel and abusive tactics clear as day, yet still feel as though I was deeply in love with this man. I was still heavily trauma bonded, and whilst I knew categorically that there was no future for me and Mr. C, the emotions I experienced were trying to tell me differently, and like quitting smoking or withdrawing from alcohol or a drug, I needed to use all the willpower I could muster to create some boundaries and then stand firm inside them. And on this day, 1 year ago, I got all the proof I needed that this was going to be the only way to deal with Mr. C. As I've mentioned, I knew what the Grey Rock communication method was, and I was attempting to use it. Looking back through the messages, I can still see a lot of emotional responses, but if we were to compare them to ones from months before, then we would definitely see a marked change. You see, these behaviours, they take practice. For pretty much all of us who have been victimised by an abuser, our life has revolved around them and the relationship. So going cold turkey or no contact can just feel too scary. Establishing those boundaries on one day and then maintaining them no matter what someone else says feels alien to a chronic people pleaser. But it's what has to be done. And on this day, Mr. C demonstrated to me just why I was never going to get anything other than more pain, more hurt, and more disruption to my peace if I stayed in friendly contact with him. I have gone backwards and forwards in deciding just how much of this text message exchange I should share, not for any other reason than I don't want to bore anyone, but quite honestly, every message offers an insight into the mind of the abuser, and I just know that some of you watching this will be able to relate to these tactics. One of the most shocking things I found since I escaped from Mr. C and started to connect with other survivors is just how much these people use all the same tactics. It's like they attended some sort of controller college, and even the text messages they send, emails they write, or the things they say can be so similar that in a weird way, it not only offers comfort knowing that I'm not alone in my experiences, it also removes a bit of the power. They're not special. Their manipulative tactics are predictable, they're commonplace, and only have as much weight as we allow them to. Ignoring them, much like ignoring a tantruming 5-year-old, does work to not only establish what we will and will not tolerate, but it also prevents us from being drawn into what is often utter nonsense designed to confuse, to tire, and to upset us. It's to zap us of energy and keep us blinkered from the truth. And it's for these reasons that I'm sharing all the 32 messages in this exchange between me and Mr. C on this day 1 year ago. And all of these messages were sent and delivered before 9 a.m. So even though I am sharing all these messages, I won't pick apart each one as much as I could, but I will pick out some of the relevant parts and give a bit of background to how I was feeling when they were flying in. and give a bit of background to how I was feeling when they were flying in. I really remember this week as being a huge turning point for me, and we've already heard about how I was taking action to support my healing kind of in private, but here we can see how that manifested in more confidence and clarity when seeing Mr. C's messages for what they really were. In the first message, despite knowing that I'm expecting a baby girl, he chooses to use "the" in capital letters to describe our baby. A shameless and blatant attempt to incite an emotional response from a protective and loving mother. This is provocative, to say the least. And he also mentions my abrasive and business-like demeanour. Now, this is how he's interpreted my use of the grey rock communication strategy, because it's really important that you don't tell an abuser that you're using a specific strategy to communicate. And so, as tempting as it might be to tell them, this would only hand them more power. I respond and I attempt to explain myself for what feels like the billionth time. Looking back, it is hard to believe that I bothered to say the same thing so many times over such a long period of time, and I didn't realise just how different our perceptions of reality were. But you only know what you know, and we're all doing the best with the resources and the information that we have. Now, since his response is provoked by the first line of my message, there's a good chance he didn't even read the rest of what I wrote, and that's an important thing to remember too. When you're communicating with an abuser, they're literally scanning your messages for opportunities to capitalise on. They don't care about well-reasoned arguments or valid points, and in true narcissistic style, he flips it onto me by implying that my reactions to his abusive behaviours were in fact the only abuse that occurred in our relationship. After all, he genuinely acts as though he didn't believe he was doing anything wrong, and it's shocking. I bothered to acknowledge this question and admit that I had done things that I'm not proud of, but that it is because of those times I won't engage in any more of this. Then comes a message which is a really good example of spiritual abuse. You see, for many people, it's much easier to identify physical abuse or name-calling, blatant insults or threats. And after a while, we might even start to pick up on the coercive or the controlling abuse by gaslighting, or through financial abuse or digital abuse where our phone use is monitored or limited. But spiritual abuse is just as rife and just as wrong. We, as humans, are all entitled to our own beliefs and to follow whatever belief system we choose. If our behaviours are legal and broadly accepted by society as normal, whatever that is, then our beliefs should be respected. In fact, it's your human right to hold whatever religious or non-religious beliefs you want. So by attempting to control someone through religion or questioning and insulting their beliefs, it's just another way an abuser attempts to seek out control and extract supply from the victim. He then follows that message up with a blatant insult and suggests that he has decided that I am not for his life. I don't rise to this, and I ask him when I can collect my belongings, but he doesn't reply. Instead, he starts sending messages that I had sent him months and months earlier, and were sent at a time when I was so heavily gaslit, I thought I was to blame for everything that was wrong in our relationship. Because there had been times where I had reacted. I'd reacted to his insults and his intimidation. I had shouted at him. I had told him how unfair it all was. I told him how awful his behaviour was, and I'd used inflammatory language, and I'd even lashed out when backed into a corner. This is because I'm a normal human being, not an abuser, but a normal human who, when pushed, reacted. And if you too have done the same, then know that you're not alone. You're not a bad person for this, and whilst you may feel remorse, you may feel guilt, and you may feel shame, this is okay. It's because you're a good person you feel like that, not a bad one. Now, for whatever reason, him sending these messages to me seemed to alert me to just how ridiculous some of this had been. How many times I'd said the same things, how many times I'd taken responsibility for things which ultimately had been caused as a result of his outbursts. I never just walked into the house and started laying into him, but he did that to me. Yet here I was, being told that I was the abusive one again. And then another message from the past comes in, sent a long time before. From memory, it was sent after the first time I left him. And he uses this message as an example of how I had been the problem all along. But I seem to be learning and I ignore it. I use the grey rock technique and I don't show any emotion. I don't respond, and he sends me more emotionally fueled messages. Fortunately, I don't know what this man was thinking at the time because my mind doesn't work like his, but I did spend pretty much every waking minute with him for nearly 4 years, and most of it in a very hypervigilant state of awareness. So I don't think it would be presumptuous to say that he is purposely using emotional language to provoke a response from me here. He tells me he can't communicate with me, despite him being the one that can't answer simple questions. He brings up our child, and then he makes the claim that his intentions are pure and that he's going to thrive without me. But I stick to grey rock. And so he belittles my question by suggesting that I don't actually need any of my possessions. Not only is he devaluing me in this message, he's devaluing my physical body and what I enjoy doing. He's behaving like a monster, but I don't rise to it. I stick to the facts, and I start to suggest that it might be necessary to involve a third party, as this kind of communication clearly isn't working. I was so fed up of all of this by now. These text message exchanges had been a regular thing for weeks now, and they were so draining, so depressing, and so soul-destroying because they didn't go anywhere. They were just the perfect way for him to get to me, and I was allowing them to go on. So when he requests that I stop bullshitting him, I saw an opportunity, and this, ladies and gentlemen, was the turning point. I ask him a question, a ridiculous question. I ask him, so, if I just admit to whatever you say, you'll help me get my belongings in a mature and responsible manner. And then the next 3 messages demonstrate what it's like to communicate with an abuser perfectly. How illogical, inconceivable, and downright ridiculous the whole process is, and ultimately just what a waste of time it is. So I'm just going to read them out. And so I say, in a somewhat petulant manner, it has to be said, and certainly full of sarcasm, but I was seriously fed up of all this by now. Whatever you say, you are right about everything. You know my thoughts better than I know my own. You have a window into my brain that enables you to have a full understanding of every experience I have ever had and every thought since. You are right about everything. Now can I collect my stuff? And in what can only be described as truly narcissistic, self-centered, and grandiose in its reply, he says, maybe if you'd exercised that in the past, instead of 5 weeks at your mum's away from everything you knew, we may have got through it. But you didn't. You shouted and screamed obscenities at me and then made me beg for your attention. You're a disgrace to expect me to react in any other way. You wrecked my hopes and dreams, and you want mature and responsible. And it's at this point the game ends. He's shown his true colours in all their glory, and there isn't any going back now. He said it. He's admitted what he wanted. Full and complete control over my reality, my thoughts and my behaviour, and I even suggest that he might be enjoying this. And with that, he tells me not to contact him again. He tries to twist the knife in by suggesting that I'm a bad friend and that I'm unlikable, and tells me how much he's glad he hasn't shunned our neighbours. And there's no need for me to tell you all of the awful things he said about those people behind closed doors, but to suggest he put the effort in with them is so far removed from the truth I can't even begin to explain it to you. And so that was it. There was never a single emotionally charged message sent from me to him ever again, not one. In fact, there weren't many messages sent at all, less than a dozen, I think. I'd regained my power here, not over him or anyone else, but over myself. And this was the start of a new life for me and my children, and one that we deserved. And thank you for listening to this instalment of 1 Year On. This has been one of the more difficult ones for me to put together because it is very obvious that the man I thought I loved never, ever, ever existed. This was who he truly was. But I have found a deep strength inside me to overcome this and to connect with survivors. And if anybody has experienced anything like this, or this resonates with anybody, then know that you are not alone. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye bye.